we're here.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, everybody.
We're a couple minutes late because we've been out shoveling.
Yes, exactly. So we're going to make sure everybody's got a good connection, and then I've got some questions about quilting. So let us know if you're here, and we will start. Hey, I hope you. I know some of you in Texas or. You probably aren't watching. Yeah, because you don't have power or heat. But I hope you get your power and everything restored
and have lots of
quickly.
quilts to keep warm if your heat is out. It's tricky out there.
We've had, I think, you think like 3 or 4 inches last night, probably. Yeah.
Oh.
We've had a total of 39 inches in the last 2 weeks. It's been quite the experience. So I know that there were a bunch of questions about quilting, and so that's what we're going to talk about today. So questions about thread color and techniques and thread weights and
we're also
things.
going to talk a bit about kind of just general strategy when you have a quilt, how you look at it and decide what to do, because that's often a challenge for people.
Exactly. So
and it's great to have so many of you here.
Yes,
so
exactly.
Lots of you heading in.
So we're just going to get started, and this video, like our other videos, is live. No, it's on the Facebook page. After you're just dying to interrupt me. I can tell you. I know your body language is just finished. It will be up on this page, so if you've missed the beginning, you'll be able to watch the whole thing later on both our Facebook page and on our YouTube channel.
Yeah, we'll post it to YouTube afterwards.
Is there something else you wanted to answer?
Let's dive in.
Oh, here we go. Hi, Judy Brown. How are you? Oh, and Kim is here, and Rosemary. Okay, great. Okay. All right. 14 inches last night. Yeah, well, that's about what we got.
We said 3 to 4 last night. That was after we shoveled a good 10 before going to bed.
Yeah, there were 11. Tom Skilling said there was 11, and then another 3 or 4. So yeah, I think we got something similar.
Yeah,
to that.
Marie in Florida, you don't have this problem right now, but it's
actually
not a problem. It's beautiful. I wish we have the camera facing us here in the studio, but it's.
I actually have a picture of the front so they can see.
Oh, I didn't set up. Okay, you can just hold that up.
Yeah, I can just hold it up.
We'll do this, and then we will get to quilts. It won't be all about weather, but you know how this goes.
So let me see if you can see this.
That's the front of our home.
That's what it looks like. 39 inches of snow in 2 weeks. So anyway, okay, so let's talk quilting. All right, so go ahead and add your questions about quilting. I got 3 that I saw on Instagram and Facebook yesterday. So
we'll start with those.
We'll start in that. And the first one, let's just get the first one out of the way.
Breathe.
And you know, I want to say at the outset that the goal of doing these is to encourage you and to share with you our point of view.
Yeah, and that's
important.
all it is. It's really important because we know that we have strong opinions, but they're just ours. We will give you information, give you our thoughts, but they're ultimately your quilts, and you want to do what's right for your quilts, for your uses. So if we say something that kind of contradicts how you think about it, there are a couple options. One, you can totally ignore us and just go with what you want. That's fine. You can think about what we've said and kind of weigh it as an option. But like, we're just kind of encouraging you to reflect on the decisions you make. And ultimately, one of the most important things is that you finish your quilts that you want to have. That quilting for some people is a joy and for others it's an obstacle. And we want to help you be able to finish your projects.
So Diane gets a special shout out because she's in Sweden and she's joining us all the way from Sweden.
So you're laughing at our snow.
Yeah, you're thinking our snow is nothing. But anyway, let's let's start. Look, so I just wanted to kind of piggyback on that and say, um, quilt making is supposed to be fun, and if we want you to make things, and so if we give you advice on quilting that disagrees with something that would be fun for you, I want you to do what's fun for you. So that's
And
the big disclaimer before we launch into opinions.
and I will also, obviously we've got all these disclaimers. For some people, quilting is a competitive sport and they love the show aspect, and actually they love being judged and they love trying to win competitions. That's not our that doesn't make us tick. If it makes you tick, what we say may not well, from
Jive.
jive with that, but it also, I will say, the design thinking that we discuss, I think will help you. Like even the question that Kathy asked about deciding on density, we will get to
We'll get
that
to that.
in
Yeah.
a moment because I think that has to do with all of this. So let's
Okay.
dive in.
The big one, stitch in the ditch.
Yeah,
Okay.
let's just get
All
this
right.
out of
Let's
the
just
way.
rip the Band-Aid off. Okay.
Or rip the quilting out.
So I said publicly many times that I'm tempted to install a stitch in the ditch hotline in case you're tempted to stitch in the ditch, that you could call us and I
Yeah.
could tell you what else to do. So here's why I never recommend it, and I've never seen a quilt made better by it. Um, is that there's so many problems it creates, but the biggest one to me is that I think people do it because they want to feel like they're making progress, and they feel like just outlining the piecing um, is. I've heard many things. I've heard the you need to anchor it down. I've heard so and so, insert famous quilter's name, told me to do it. I've heard it's gonna make it needs. I need it to make my colors pop. I need it to get the everything. What did um, I can't remember the word somebody used, but to lock in all of the
Yeah,
blocks or
I've heard the
something.
term lock in.
Yeah,
And I'll also say the other reason that I think one of the main reasons it's used is because people don't know what to do.
that's the big
And
reason.
it's the kind of obvious suggestion. You look at the quilt and there's already a structure of the piecing and you think, well, there's my guide right there. I don't have to do anything but follow what's already there. And this, which is what makes it so kind of obvious to do for people, is actually the main reason we discourage quilting in the or stitching in the ditch.
Yeah, I think the big thing, the kind of overall concept that I want people to think about when they're quilting isn't how do I stitch each block individually, but what is the goal of the quilting beyond just making sure the batting is stable? Like, what is the
It's more than
design goal?
structural.
Right.
And we always look at a quilt as layers of design. There's the layer of the piecing, there's the color work, there's the quilting, and there's the color of the quilting, there's the texture of the quilting. So these are like layers that you're stacking on top of each other to make one strong, beautiful, cozy, lovely, what fill in the blank quilt. And so our goal when we think about quilting is to have a kind of a strategy of how it fits with the entire quilt design.
The other thing that Stitch in a Ditch does that I think people don't even realize is that, so especially if you're on a domestic machine, you've rolled up your quilt, right? And then all you're looking at is that one little area. And if you don't have a strategy of the overall quilt before you start stitching, then you just tend to focus on one area at a time and not look. It's a forest for the trees kind of thing. But another thing I don't like about stitching in the ditch is that it looks messy. I think it either looks messy or it looks too stiff to me. Because even if you're great at stitching in the ditch,
you're gonna miss.
Yeah, you're gonna miss, and it's. I think, yeah, it just looks. It looks. I think it looks messy.
Well,
But
it,
let me just finish this before I forget.
we both have a lot to say on
Yes, we
this.
do. There's a lot of opinions about this. But the other thing is that I don't like how it looks on the back, and it looks, the stitching disappears on the front, but on the back,
It doesn't
it
relate in
doesn't.
any
Yeah,
way to that overall back. I mean, it's kind of a ghost of what's on the front.
yeah.
But for me, the other issue is patchwork is about cutting fabric into pieces, sewing them back together to create new forms. And when you stitch in the ditch, you're generally reinforcing the smaller forms rather than drawing attention to the larger forms and the larger designs that have been created by piecing everything together. So it's almost as if you go to all this effort to make a really strong pattern block quilt, and then you deconstruct it. You kind of take away that the beauty of the whole by emphasizing the individual
But it's
pieces,
like you're isolating things. You've tried to unite things, and then you start isolating
isolating
things.
them, and
So
so and I think when stitching in the ditch goes just a little more downhill sometimes is when sometimes
if we
people,
haven't beaten this
yeah,
cat,
will stitch in the ditch to like anchor the quilt, and then they'll have another quilting pattern. They feel like the quilt is then stabilized, almost basted, if you will, and then they do more kind of free motion quilting within the area between the stitch and the ditch. But the problem is your eye is always drawn to those strong lines that are the stitch and the ditch because they're reinforcing the piecing line, so it's like a double whammy.
it's visually
And
confusing.
it's and it's visually so strong that it's
Yeah,
so so we
we
won't
don't recommend
it,
in the
it
ditch. If
which
you love
raises,
it, do it.
yeah, and again, we get why you do it. And sometimes it's just like it's the expedient way to do things. And so up to you. We would just say next time you're drawn to it, maybe just step back and ask yourself what would be another solution. And we're going to be talking about
Yeah,
those.
and I do think it's kind of the low hanging fruit, and it's the default for
Yeah.
people because they're afraid of what else to do. But I think if you take a step, start
Yeah.
stitching in the ditch, and ask yourself whether you really need it,
Yeah.
you'll find out you don't need it. So let's go on to the next question, which was about using, do we ever use 40 weight thread? Yeah, that's
Like
almost all that we use.
98% of the time.
So we don't have any gig with signature, but it is processed in the US from either like Indian or Egyptian uh, cotton, but we use this Tex 40, and these are, you want to hold up some of
And
these
about,
colors?
we've been asked this on some previous Facebook Lives, so uh, we may repeat a couple things, but when the question comes back up, we do want to address it. So, signature, when we started quilting 20 years ago, I can't remember, but they had what, maybe 15 or 20
Mm-hmm.
colors of cotton. Back then, the majority of the quilting thread available was synthetic or a blend. Now they've got a very, very large variety of colors, not nearly as large as some of the high end manufacturers. But the reality is, we talk about this all the time, when you're quilting, the thread goes in a slight valley, and the purity, you don't see the color in its purest form most of the time because it's in the slight shadow. So I actually don't think most of the time you need as many nuanced colors as people think they do. Um, there are times when you need the perfect pink and you just have to go and search quilt shops and search online until you find that perfect pink. But for most of what we do, there's a lot of wiggle room with thread color.
So Judy was asking about about thread color being a challenge for her. And um, I always say go with a more desaturated, lighter version of the general palette. So, for example, if you, well, let's see, if you have a green quilt, um, this is the bamboo color. But if you had a green quilt, green slash yellow quilt, um, not bright. Um, the bright colors, unless it's really intentional and you want it to be contrasting, going with a desaturated, dustier, softer,
Duller.
duller color in a lighter value is always a good option. Taupe, gray, like this. Is this baguette? This kind of tan, cream.
Wheat,
Yes.
Mother Goose,
Yes.
coffee. I mean, I can just name all
Yeah.
these, and this kind of very now on camera. This probably looks like bright yellow, just the way that video works, but it's actually a very
It's
soft
like butter yellow.
butter yellow.
Yeah.
Daisy, I think this one is. Yes, Daisy. That we use a lot where a lot of other people might use white just because it's not quite as bright as white, and it's not, if we're doing a light quilt that has a wide variety of hues in it, um, gray, a light gray might just kind of dirty it up.
Yeah.
And the yellow is a great chameleon. I mean,
Especially with like pinks and stuff like
yeah,
that too. But
we have an entire cabinet of thread, but there are probably 10 colors that we go to over and over.
okay, so I think we should probably then go to the next massively controversial
Okay.
project
Question.
topic, which is variegated thread.
So
Variegated thread.
I knew variegated would come up, and I actually thought, oh, you know what? I will grab a spool of variegated thread to show and explain why we don't use it.
Do we have a spool of variegated
Well,
thread?
this is exactly it. We were given boxes of variegated thread. We've given it all away
Yeah.
because I thought we kept some
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
to talk
yeah.
about. So,
Explain why variegated thread is problematic.
variegated thread is it's a cousin to stitch in the ditch. They are both defaults for people. If people have a quilt, and I see variegated thread all the time on batik quilts, because a lot of batiks use a very irregular dyeing method where you have specks of green mixed with purple, mixed with blue, and the color, the range of hues is huge in a lot of batiks. And so people don't know what thread color to pick, and they think variegated thread. My batiks are primarily purple, blue, and green. So I will get the purple, blue, and green variegated thread. And believe me, there are lots of brands of this out there. But the problem is the thread then it's not smart. It just goes where you go, and you have no control over where the purple of the thread lands. So it ends up often looking splotchy, and
Messy.
you might get a dark area in your batik where suddenly you have a bunch of the lighter blue in the variegated thread, and it stands out, and then all of a sudden the variegated thread turns to purple, and so it just looks like someone spilled something blue. Or
You know, it undermines your quilting. It undermines your quilting because
it does.
It emphasizes, it makes your quilting look inconsistent because the color's inconsistent.
Yeah, you're looking at the hot spots in the color rather than the beauty of the quilting. And so 9 times out of 10, if someone's struggling with the thread color, they do one of two things. Well, there are a few things. They get variegated thread, they stitch in the ditch. Sometimes they look for the thinnest thread they can find because it will disappear. Every now and then, and we see this a lot less than we did 15 years ago. People used to buy invisible thread to quilt with, and that's kind of a hard no for me. That invisible thread does not get better over time. It's just,
It doesn't feel good
it
either.
doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
Even the soft, there are soft invisible threads now, but it's a pain to tie. So we would just say pick one color that is kind of a mid value. If you have all these colors in your batik quilt or other quilt, I think people will obsess about what color, meaning hue, it is purple, blue, green. Whereas I think just finding a value, kind of something that's not too light, not too dark, that will blend with all the fabrics is going to be a much more successful choice than using variegated thread.
Well, and of course, and we've talked about this so many times, but it's always just good to remember. Oh, don't judge the color based on how it looks on the spool or the cone or whatever. You really need to put it against the fabric because that really makes a big difference.
And ideally, you actually would sew a tiny piece with batting to see how it looks when it's in the actual quilted quilt, because it is different than when it's just on top.
Okay, so and you know, I can see Nancy saying she's going to use her variegated thread for piecing. You know,
Yeah.
do whatever brings you joy in your quilting. But I have seen some people who have said, why does my quilting look bad? And it's just, it's the variegated thread. But anyway.
Yeah, it's a good, you can use, if you, now, we've ruined it for you, use it up piecing.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Okay, so somebody was asking about quilting on applique, quilting around applique.
I'll grab a quilt.
Okay, and you know, I think this kind of goes back to the what we said at the beginning of it really depends on how you're using the quilt. If this is going to be a children's quilt that gets thrown in the washer and dryer all the time, that is a very different situation than if you're trying to do it to apply for a show for prize money or something. And there are, we know from many conversations that certified quilt judges have different opinions about how to quilt things than we do, and so this is why you want to think about the end use of the quilt before you make decisions about it. However, you know, it depends on the applique. To me, if it's a small piece of applique and you want the applique to stand out, you might go around the applique, and then, you know, if the applique needs to be quilted at all, if it's a large area of applique, I would quilt through it.
So I will show two different pillows that I'm just seeing in Facebook Live. I've got a nice like spot from the window.
The sun is moved.
The sun is attacking me. If you could grab that pillow at the bottom.
Yeah.
So I've got two pillows that I hand appliqued, or no, that I appliqued. One is hand appliqued and one is machine appliqued.
Gosh, it's so heavy.
So this, I'm going to bring up close, whoops. And I'm trying to get the light so you can see. Can you see the quilting is concentric circles starting in that center applique block. This is our jawbreakers pattern. And what I wanted to do here was not reinforce. We already have really strong shapes in each of these 9 squares because of the bright colors. These are our warp and weft fabrics. But I loved taking that concentric circle and going all the way to the edge of the pillow with that. Whereas there's another pillow I did here, completely different technique. This is called fringe benefits, and this is machine applique. And it uses the same fabrics, but what I did, if you look here, I laid these squares down on the white fabric so they were absolutely touching. They were, you know, there was no white showing between them. And then I quilted diagonally in both directions, and did a perimeter stitch about somewhere eighth or quarter inch, I think about eighth or a quarter
Yeah.
inch in, and then washed it and tumbled it dry so that it would intentionally fray, and then picked all the loose threads off and got this wonderful kind of fraying, almost chenille-like look. And if you look, people were asking about thread color. I went with white here because I'm not trying to hide the fact. This is kind of structure that you want to see. So I want you to see how the pieces are held on, but I also didn't want little bits of color showing through where the stitching went between these. So these are both applique and both, a different approach to it.
So there was a question on, Susan asked about thread color for quilting on black fabric. If if it's solid black fabric with some sort of piecing in it and it's a solid black background, I would use a black thread. If they are black prints that have other colors in them, I would use a gray.
And then it also depends on, is it just black? As we was saying, we've done a couple quilts that have black sashing, but very different colors within it. And you'd be surprised. Some people are afraid to have like a camel colored thread or something come onto the black because they think it's going to be stand out so much. Remember, you're usually not looking at the quilt super close, and sometimes when you're a foot or two back, you don't even see it. So don't, Weeks was saying look at the individual strand of thread, but also back up a bit and keep some perspective, because you're generally going to be seeing a large section of the quilt. You're not going to be staring up close, so you can get away with a lot more than you might think. So you want to talk about this?
Yeah, this is our jewel box quilt, and we did black thread. We quilted it with black thread on the black part and then changed thread colors on the inside, and you can see on the back.
Now, I want to show you the back from a distance because we made an interesting decision with this.
Threads.
Yeah, threads everywhere.
Always.
The black stippling is black bobbin thread and black top thread. These individual circles, we changed the color and did a concentric. I'm going to move this up, kind of an. Is that?
Yeah, they can see.
There we go. I can't see the camera, so I'm hoping that's good.
I can. Yeah, it's good.
So we did a spiral where we spiraled into the center, turned around, and came back out between the circles and changed the thread color each time. So there's orange thread, purple thread, blue thread on the top. However, even though this was meant to be a wall hanging, we left the bobbin thread gray on all of these just because it gives a beautiful kind of monotone line drawing feel to the back. And it's a little detail that to me was really nice. And if I were making this a bed quilt, I would have done the same thing.
Yeah.
Because when you fold it over, I like, on the front, the colors stand out. On the back, it's just the forms and the line.
Exactly. Okay, so let's see. Then another question, also controversial, rulers in quilting. So this is, again, personal preference. I would not, if you, there are certain things that are popular with quilt judges that I don't enjoy myself personally, which is why I'm not a quilt judge for the most part. Occasionally we have, but I don't want something that looks like it was made in a factory. I like the combination of the precision of piecing and a more
A, se-
relaxed.
a sense of the maker's hand.
But it's also just a little bit less stiffness,
Yeah.
with a few exceptions.
So ruler work, which is very popular, and we have friends who are tremendously good at it,
And make a living doing it.
make a living doing it, and I actually love when people are good at what they do. It's just not what we do.
Right.
And exception would be every now and then. Oh, you've got it here.
Yeah, straight line quilting.
Straight line quilting. This is our billiards quilt, and I'm gonna bring this a little closer. How's that, Weeks?
Yeah, you can see it.
So this is really simple straight line quilting with gray thread. And the thing is, the forms here are so large, and you've got the circles, you've got the triangles. We want
High contrast
and
patterns.
high contrast pattern, and you kind of have transparency going on. There's a lot going on this quilt. We didn't want to complicate it with the stitching, and so here for sure, the straight line quilting kind of enhanced the whole pattern. There was the question earlier about density of quilting, and we can talk about this in a couple quilts. But here, okay, let me do this again. If I go up here, we actually prototyped the density. When you're doing straight lines, one of the questions becomes, how far apart are they? You know, in modern quilting, there's long been a love of what's called matchstick quilting, where the lines of quilting are so close they're like a matchstick's width apart. We're not, we don't do that. It makes for a very rigid, very stiff quilt that I don't think, it doesn't have nice drape. If you're doing it for a wall hanging, that you're just going for the textural look, okay, I totally get that. But for functional quilts, they lack warmth and they lack drape. With modern batting, like the batting we use, I think the instructions say you could quilt 8 inches apart and the batting will have structural integrity. We don't want that because then it'll just be baggy and saggy. So the question is, how far apart? We tend to look at the patchwork, the actual pieces, to determine. If you look here, we look for the smallest size. The smallest size here is about, I can't remember, I'd say that's about 1.25 inches right here, this kind of dark gray gap. And so very often, not always, but very often, we look for that smallest area and make sure that the quilting, density of the quilting is a little smaller than that. So this quilting, I'd say, is about 5/8 of an inch apart.
I would say this is the widest that we do, and this is, let's see.
Okay.
Can you hold that up since you've got the longer arms?
Yes.
This would be probably the tightest we do, which is, some of them are like 1/4 inch apart. But
one of the differences here is a lot of these strips are only 1/8 of an inch finished. This is our United States of Green quilt. And the other big difference here is that while the billiards quilt was actual straight lines, absolutely straight, United States of Green, I'm going to have to open it up to the back, is not done with a ruler at all. Weeks quilted this freehand, and
oh, here you go. You can see on the back.
Okay, let me see.
You gotta get closer. Yeah.
Ooh, sorry.
Yeah, I think you can see that more.
So you can see. I'm
just stop moving it, because then they can see it.
Okay.
There you go.
There we go. What she did, they're not all straight lines. Occasionally, well, they're kind of straight-ish lines.
Straight-ish lines, yes.
But she changed the distance between them so that it doesn't feel regular and mechanical, because the front, remember we said early on that we're trying to have kind of a unified design feel. And this is very much about variety. The whole idea behind this quilt was variety. So if she had quilted it with uniformly spaced lines, that would have made it feel mechanical. It
Mm-hmm.
would have made it feel predictable. But having the same variety in the quilting that you have in the piecing enhances the overall design.
So, let's see.
I was going to fold this up.
The circle quilt, are you talking about, I guess, that you didn't go in the ditch?
Oh,
This one? Yeah. Yeah, you just get,
we did not go in
no,
the ditch.
no ditch.
So when we quilted these
Can
concentric
you hold
circles,
it a little bit closer so they can see? It's about a quarter to an eighth of an inch from
yeah,
the edge.
the stippling goes up to the edge. However, the circular spiral starts about an eighth of an inch from the edge and never, I mean, there's no quilting at all in that ditch. Because the circle, actually, when I back up, you know exactly where the circle is. You don't need to reinforce that. You have super high contrast, green on black, blue on black. And the other thing is the way this quilt works, you have that illusion in the center of a lighter center. If you stitched in the ditch, it would draw your attention to the individual circles and away from that illusion. So once again, here you can see why stitching in the ditch would be fighting
Fighting
the
it, yeah.
overall design intention.
So most of our quilts are done free motion on a long arm machine. Occasionally we do things on a domestic machine. I did the video, the Hello Baby quilt, on our YouTube channel. I demonstrated how we quilt on a domestic machine when we do that. But a lot of it is just time for us, that it's faster to do it on a long arm. And for straight arm quilting, I guess you mean long arm maybe. Do we use a busy pattern on the back? No, we do whatever we like on the back, and sometimes, let's see. So, for example, this is our old school quilt, and this has actually we ended up pieced backing with solids on the back for that. But you can see the. Can you hold it a little closer?
Okay,
so you
let
can
me
see the
get
pattern?
closer.
So it's kind of like a wood grain pattern on the back.
And I like that kind of wood grain pattern because it gives you a little more variety than something like a stipple, but it has the same overall textural effect. And when you see it on the front, I'm intentionally holding this back because it's a dark thread, and some people would say, wait, those squares are much lighter. Did you switch thread color in those frames, in those squares? We didn't. When I get closer, you'll see, and I'll just hold this in place. What you actually see is as much the shadow of the quilting as the quilting itself. So in that lighter blue square, you can see the thread color more, but as soon as you step back, it just becomes an overall texture. And so uh, and I know what I want to say. This is a navy blue and black mini gingham. We did not use black thread, but we used a dark blue thread because it was a little less severe, I believe.
No, it's gray.
Oh wait, you know what? That's not even gray.
It looks
All
gray to
right.
me. Looks sort
Okay.
of like more of a kind of medium gray.
See, this goes to show you that when it's in that ditch, it can be hard to actually tell.
Exactly. So Marlene wants to see the red and white circle and stipples quilt from Modern Quilt Workshop from a lifetime ago.
Nice.
I am sorry that we have about 200 quilts in our storage room.
But we don't have that one.
What happened to it?
We gave that to someone.
Okay, well, we don't
have
it
it anymore.
I'm afraid. So,
But,
sorry about that.
But I can actually talk about what we did there. It was, the idea was if you have white circles on a red field and you you can basically reverse the colors on the back. So if you have white quilting on white circles, red quilting on the red background, and let's say an all red backing, you'll get white quilting of the circles to show up on the back. So it's yeah, I'm not describing it well, but uh,
It's an inverse.
it's an inverse that was fun. Yeah, sorry, we don't have that, and we've done different versions of it.
Yeah. Let's see. And then Karen wants to know about facings. Again, this is where I don't want to
Tag,
be
you're
like
it.
a buzzkill about this, but I don't enjoy facings. I don't like the way they look on the back. That big flange on the back does not work to me. So we either do, where did billiards go?
Oh, I've got it here.
Either we're going to
Oops.
do like a binding using our binding method, or we're going to do the French pillowcase method.
Which
See how clean it looks on the back?
there is
That's a sleeve,
that's
but
a sleeve, yeah, and that's just a label.
yeah,
There's no facing.
I don't like that big.
We've basically
flange on the
put sewn around three sides, turned it inside out or right side out, and then hand stitched the quilt closed. And
It's on the Hello Baby.
the Hello Baby part
two.
two of our YouTube tutorial shows how we did it. This is just a larger version, but the nice thing about this is you don't have that additional strip,
Yeah,
that flange with a facing that, again, we're always thinking about what the quilt looks like, even if you're in bed or curled up with it and you tuck it over. That flange, that facing, becomes another design element that to me looks like
well, it's not
unnecessary.
needed.
Yeah, it's not
yeah,
needed.
you don't need
We're kind of minimalists in the sense of everything counts. Your pattern thread quilting pattern counts. Your thread color counts. So the flange of a facing, if there's another way to do it without that, we're there.
It kind of reminds me of the great architects who say like the dumpster area also needs to be beautiful.
Yeah,
Like your service area in a building needs to be as beautiful as the front door.
Because whatever the kind of lowest, the weakest detail brings down
It's true.
anything. Yeah.
Okay, and I don't know what understitching is, so I can't
Oh,
comment
Karen,
on
yes,
that.
you've asked about understitching. So I don't know that term.
Yeah. United States of Green was quilted on a long arm, but I would do it with a walking foot for sure if I had been doing it on a domestic machine. So how would you quilt a traditional quilt such as a sampler or a quilt made with blocks and lattice? Simply would be my answer.
Especially,
because samplers, if you've got a lot of piecing and a lot of busyness and a lot of color and pattern, you want something that's going to be an all over. Okay, go ahead.
I was going to say, there's an exception. The Victorian crazy quilt, which was really a way that women often had of showcasing their talents, was about a wide range of luxurious fabrics and a sampler of embroidery stitches. So it was more layers of design, almost excess, and that's beautiful. That the design intention is to go all out and have it be a sampler of quilting fabrics, a sampler of stitching techniques, embroidery techniques. So that to me works because it's an intention and it's very, very focused. But I think a lot of the sampler quilts where it's truly about the individual blocks, then you just want to hold back a bit on the quilting.
And I would not, I know I see this all the time. People want to quilt each block individually. Yeah, and I think that even makes it more visually chaotic.
Yeah, and again, it depends. If you're going for the true sampler, that it's a sampler of quilting patterns and a sampler of blocks, that's one thing. I agree with Weeks that I find it to be a bit much to look at.
So this is an example. We've talked about simple quilting, but this is an example of busy quilting, and we can talk about
complex quilting.
Yeah, well, it's busy too.
Okay, let me. Sorry.
Just get a little closer. You can just show the top part.
Oh wait, this. Whoops.
Whoops. No, no,
Just a
no.
second. Just hit the mouse, and all of a sudden it's asking if we want to leave
No,
the
there we
video,
go.
which we
Okay.
don't. Okay. Okay. So
So
let me get
this
a little
was
closer,
all
then I'll hold in place.
this was all quilting on the long arm, and
By weeks.
yeah,
Let me look for a slightly darker area to see.
you can show in the back too.
Okay, so on the
Yeah,
back you might see it much better.
Yeah, show it with the gray thread on the back. Yeah. So you can see that is a very busy pattern. Not look that busy on the front because you've got so much.
Now, I'm going to try to hold this behind you a bit.
Why don't we just show it? We'll just show a picture of it.
Oh.
Yeah.
But it's so much more vibrant. This is a fade. It's a very, very complex quilt that fades from, it has 150 different solids from light to dark. And as Weeks quilted it, she quilted with gray thread, changing bands of gray going from light to dark. So it didn't, you want to be able to see it but not have it stand out too much. So it's really hard to hold up. I'll come one more time, slight angle here,
So you can
just
see
so you can see a bit more of the quilting. And I know it's tricky because it is not super high resolution, so I hope you can see that there.
So do you start quilting from the center? So if you're doing a long arm, you skip the whole basting step because everything is stretched and taut. But when I do anything on a machine, domestic machine, I would baste, yes, and I start in the center, correct?
Yeah, always working from the center out is smart.
Okay, when you use a regular style binding, how wide do you cut your binding strips? Okay, so we do a kind of, I think it's pretty unique to us, although I know some people have started.
A lot more people are doing it now.
But our binding tutorial is on our YouTube channel, and it's an all-in-one, all machine done technique that starts with a 2-inch cut strip and a clover bias tape maker, and you can see that tutorial.
And it's just top stitched all in one.
Yeah, it's a very popular video of ours on our YouTube channel. So let's see. Do you bury all your threads? No. We don't need to.
With one exception, I will say, like when
the ends.
The ends.
If there's no binding.
This is a case where with a pillowcase binding, there's no binding at all. So I tied off every one of these and buried it. But in general, we don't. Again, if you're quilting for competitions, that might be the kind of thing a judge is looking for. If you're quilting to keep warm and share your quilts with friends, if you've back tacked, it's probably going to hold together just fine.
It absolutely will. Pam is talking about, she's working on
Good morning,
leader
Pam.
And ideas for quilting. I don't think we have a follow the leader here, but a simple all over. Let's just show, this is another quilting pattern that, like this flames pattern, is a great all over, simple to do, easy on a,
can you see it there?
Can you hold it up just higher a little bit? You can see on that blue, let's see, you can see that shape. That's a great domestic machine pattern as well. That is really unifying and very easy to do.
You can really see it on that blue.
Yeah.
And what's nice about that is you go into a point and back out, so you don't have to worry about keeping a consistent curve. And Pam is mentioning she's working on Follow the Leader, which uses large pieces of often large scale prints. And in that case, that quilt was designed to showcase beautiful medium to large scale prints. So you're really looking at the fabric, and the quilting is more secondary there. And often we use that pattern to assemble a palette of lots of different prints. And so simple quilting, simple
Yeah.
all over quilting like this doesn't compete with those prints but helps unify them.
And I have said before, and I think it's worth repeating that um, I've heard people uh, suggest that the amount of quilting you do is commensurate with the quality of the quilt, and I don't agree with that. I don't think the fancier the quilting, the better it will look. Sometimes less is more, and it really just depends on the quilt. I States of green, and also for billiards, it was hard to make such a choice to do a simple pattern, but I think sometimes more is too
But
much. It's like adding too many
and,
spices.
and it goes back to this earlier question of density. One of the most common quilting mistakes, if you will, that I see people who skimp, and to them the quilt is not a valuable or important one. So they do quilting that's 3 inches apart that will structurally hold it together, but you end up with so many kind of wrinkles and that detract from the piecing, even if it was simple piecing. So I always feel like you quilting, if it's too tight, it just doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
But if it's too loose, if you had spent 2 more hours
Right.
just upping the density so you didn't have tuckers,
Wrinkles.
tucks, puckers, wrinkles, you'd be so much happier with it. And you'd realize that even a simple quilt deserves to be, beautiful, and it will last. That's the other thing. If you have just a bit more density, the wear is more even because it's not puckering in any way, and it will last longer.
Oh, and then Sophie was asking about the thread that we use. We use Signature 100% cotton Tex 40 is what we use. That's what our long arm likes. I know lots of people like the really thin, people who do thread painting and stuff like those thin threads. We don't do that sort
No.
of thing, so that's not our cup of tea. Let's see. And somebody else was asking, oh, she's making a black and white baby quilt, houndstooth pattern. Now, see, if it's a black and white and it's a baby quilt, I might go crazy and do a red thread or something like that, because baby quilts are, all
They can be
about
joyful.
contrast, but they're also about contrast.
And black and white is great for baby quilts, since we know that that's really stimulates babies' brains,
Yeah.
and that's terrific.
So I think you could really have fun with that, depending on if it's a simple houndstooth pattern. I think you could choose a bright color and go crazy with one single color.
And the great thing about babies, they're not critical.
Yeah. So okay, let's see what
Looking at some other
else.
questions here.
Thread size used. We use the Tex 40 because
For
it
our
seems
quilting,
yeah,
yeah.
for our quilting.
And we have some thinner weights like Tex 50 and Tex 60. We just don't use them as much. The advantage of them is you can get more on a bobbin. But I actually like the thickness of Tex 40 because you can see the thread color, which to me is nice.
So I also thought I'd just bring out the lavish quilt to talk about its quilting, because this is a very visually complex quilt. And we did 2 different strategies for the quilting of this. And can you open up just a little bit more
Yes.
so they can see the rows? Thank you.
How's that?
Perfect. So these are concentrically, it's like a dahlia pattern. We turn around and then go back out. So these have one quilting pattern, and then the outside, all of these areas have a simple stipple. And part of that is because we have these narrow areas here we have to get in. And you want the stippling pattern to be able to get in there. And you can see that. Can you get a little bit closer? They can see
Very
that
hard to see this quilting.
there's no
because
stitching in the ditch. So you can see, I hope, that there's two different patterns there.
But actually the patterns aren't. I mean, there's
Let me
so
see if
much
you can
visual
see.
complexity
Yeah.
here. It's really hard to see the quilting. Um, but I think what Weeks was just talking about with stippling, if people do stipple, they often say, "How dense does my stippling need to be?" And it goes back to looking at your areas that you're stippling. In this case, we knew, whoops, that we had to stipple right in between these circles. So the stipple had to be big enough to fit a couple rows going through. If it was too big, there can only be one way through.
Right.
And if it's too small, the quilt will get stiff. So the other thing is if we're quilting something that has triangles and we need to go into that point, you want a quilting pattern that allows you to get into that point. So it's weighing out the strategy of where you're going and what you have to fit the quilting to do.
So ironing the quilts after we're done. So
Yeah.
we discussed that to get this crinkly texture, that we put our quilts in the washer and dryer, and then after it comes out of the dryer, we use a really good steam iron to be able to kind of relax the whole thing. And
Yeah, not to press it
you're
flat.
not ironing so much as just sort of,
Steaming.
well, I guess you are ironing because we're gliding the iron over the top.
But not pressing hard.
Right.
It's almost.
We're just kind of
And Nancy, press. You say that sometimes, even though your quilt is flat and square, after you wash it, the edges look kind of wavy. Great, it's a quilt.
No, but I actually think this would help because no, she's saying.
Oh wait,
yeah,
like
yeah.
It's to me, it's a balancing act because you don't want it to be so stiff. It's not a painting, but if it's too wavy and that's distracting, then a light steaming does a great job.
Yeah, I think you want it to look square and generally flat.
Mm-hmm.
So I would get a really good steam iron and just glide it over more. Or if you're using polyester batting and you're have any concerns about temperature, as you mentioned, just hold it, hover it like half an inch over it with a lot of steam, and all of the quilt will just relax and lie flat on the surface.
And the last thing, if you're ever hanging a quilt for, let's say your guild has a quilt show, and one of the challenges with quilt shows that are all volunteer hung is usually people bring their quilts folded, everything is hung, and the lighting is up high, which means that if there are still folds or creases in the quilts, those get pretty severe shadows that can be very distracting in a quilt show. And just taking a spray bottle of spray water, just light water. And
assuming that they've pre-washed.
Yes, if you pre-wash, yes, which we do. You don't want bleeding, but if you've pre-washed, quilt is fine. A very light spritzing of water and smoothing it out and letting that hang overnight can really remove some of those wrinkles.
I have to say, I would personally like the job of going around to the quilt shows of the country with a steamer. It's like, for crying out loud, like steam those things. Like just have somebody walk through and steam the quilts.
And again,
when somebody has a question about whiskers,
okay, she'll get that. The next thing is, let's say you've worked really hard, you're someone who does love exhibiting your quilts, and there's a call for entry, your quilt is accepted, you're super thrilled about it. What I would do is not fold it and box it. I would steam it, get it nice and flat, roll it, and ship it in, if you can, ship it in a long box, a long tube or something. Because if you ship it rolled, the people hanging the show generally just take it out of the packaging and hang it. They don't want the responsibility of pressing, ironing, steaming. So how they get it is how it's hung. And so I know that we don't enter shows often, but sometimes, you know, a museum might have a show of our work, or we'll be invited to have an exhibit somewhere. And we really try to roll every quilt when we can.
So somebody was asking about the Whiskers quilt, and we used a green solid on the back.
Oh, okay. Now,
Yes.
this is a slight exception to a lot of the quilting we've done, because can you see these are kind of triangular spirals? This is a pattern that I developed. We do have a computerized, digitized long arm. We don't ever use it to quilt purchased quilting patterns, shall we say?
Right.
Like when you buy it, I don't know, it came with 1,000 quilting patterns or something.
Yeah.
We've never used a single one. But what we have done is sometimes, like in this case, these concentric triangles are something that I designed, and sometimes we do a quilting pattern, digitize it, and then play it back. And so this is a different approach altogether.
Right.
But it's
And that wasn't the name of a deadline.
yeah, and actually I really like it.
I do too.
I like it because on the front, you don't, especially with these bright colors, you don't see the quilting so much. But when you get up close, you have a lovely all over texture that's just a little different from kind of a stipple.
Okay, so let's see. Where are we? And I think somebody wanted to see the back of.
Lavish?
I think it's Lavish.
Okay,
It's hard to know.
It's
It's hard to know what quilts you're
now,
showing.
Here, it's hard to see this because of, like, when you see this, all you're going to see is the fabric. Even up close, it's extremely hard to see the quilting.
Okay, so Patricia says she can't use a bright color, so then just use a gray. Like, just use a light gray with it. That'll look great. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. Did you say you have the pillow method binding on YouTube? Yes. It's on the Hello Baby Part 2 tutorial. We walk you through a smaller version, but it's the same concept.
Same technique, yes.
Exactly. And it shows you how to do the French pillowcase binding technique. And we also have on our YouTube channel our regular all-in-one super fast. And tell them how fast you can bind a quilt with
Queen
that.
size quilt, 45 minutes with the all-in-one method.
So the batting we prefer is 100% cotton. If you have quilts 20, then I would steam. Yeah. Because I just,
almost
I don't know, any melting points.
Every quilt we've shown you today was done with lightweight 100% cotton batting.
And we do not sell our quilting patterns.
Oh, I've digitized a bunch of my quilting patterns for our own use. And honestly, we've never sold them, not because, I guess people might want to use them and purchase them. There aren't enough hours in the day.
Yeah, it's just one of those things.
And actually, the majority of the ones that we've digitized are our hand-done work that is kind of warts and all. So when it's used, it looks hand quilted, or hand guided, I should say.
Okay, so I think we've still got some snow to shovel.
We do, and
I hope you all are well and enjoyed Snow Day edition.
It was really fun to just do this rather than just the first of the month, have a little snow day.
Yeah, we'll be back in March though for the next Quilt First at noon Central Time.
We'll always have fun things to show. We've got a busy week ahead. We've got
Yes,
new quilts we're
we do.
working on. We're developing a new fabric line. Never a dull moment.
Yes.
So.
So, if you are, I hope you're in. If you're in one of those states that's, not accustomed to snow and having electrical outlet outages and all of that, I hope you get your power in soon. And
Here we're just going to enjoy the sun. I'm going to go cross country skiing this afternoon. I think.
It's beautiful. After we get some work done. So take care, everybody, and
thanks for coming.
We'll if you missed the beginning, we'll put this on both our Facebook page and our YouTube channel.
It may take a couple hours to get to the YouTube.
So,
I'm got to go teach a class.
So take care. Have a great day.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.